Listen, well, oh, great.
I
Okay.
oh okay. Don't I'll cut it. I'll whatever.
I'm not
Do you
worried.
want me to unrecord for a minute?
No, I'm not worried. I
It's
don't think
awesome.
there's anything that I'll say that like could be damaging in any way to either of us.
Is there anything you don't want to talk about?
No.
Okay. It is so good to talk to you. I guess in my life, I never would have thought in 1,000 years that I would be speaking to you in this capacity. Like, I used to cover celebrities in Canada. I could see that maybe you had a show or something and we would have had one of those, phoners or whatever. But this is just,
Yeah.
I know it's just surreal, right? Because I'm sure you must feel the same way when you're like talking to people.
Well, it's such a different dynamic, right? I mean, for me, this is really kind of an honor and a privilege to be able to talk to somebody who's been working in this space much longer than I have, and who, I was following you before we ever started talking.
I remember when you started following me, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, she's interested in
Oh,
this stuff. Cool. Of
oh,
course she is. She's my
very interested when I started to realize what was happening to me was, part of the menopause transition, or, generally speaking, menopause, even though, when you get into the nitty gritty, now I know there are all these different phases of menopause, but it gets very confusing to talk about every phase. But yeah, no, I don't. It's so funny. You're still getting an interview with me, but it's like a peer-to-peer interview. It's not like you're a journalist and I am a personality. You know what I mean? I find that the dynamic is actually really much more wonderful because it allows for conversation, and it allows much less for the kind of interview where you ask questions and I answer them. You know what I mean? I love the idea that this is a mutual collaboration and conversation. You bring an incredible amount of knowledge to this topic, and I bring a lot of my personal experience to this topic, which is why I decided to run a company, which, to a lot of people is like, what the what? I mean, what is she doing? And I still get people, sorry, I have a little bit of a cold. So if I sound kind of nasal, that's why. Yay, we got through COVID. I managed not to get COVID, but I did manage to get the common cold.
Getting it now. Do you find that? Like people are getting sick now. I just feels like all around me, but they're all like, I don't have COVID. Yeah.
Yes. It went from my head to my chest. So I got so scared because I was like coughing so much that I went and got retested. But yeah, no, my doctor said it is everywhere. Like our immune systems are just not ready, for even like the tiniest little bug. So, whatever. Anyway, that's why I sound nasal. But I think, what I was going to say is the biggest misconception that has happened to me so far, and there are many, but the biggest one has been that I am the spokesperson for this company instead of actually running this company as a CEO. And because, that's how people know me. They see me as talent. They see me as a spokesperson. That's what I've done for the last 20 years. But, nobody in the media world was talking about menopause. And I think that part of that is because, when you look specifically at women, it's very hard for them to talk about menopause because we always, whisper it like it's a disease. And we also think about it as a sort of past expiration date. And I think that for a lot of people who are infinitely more famous than any kind of attention I ever had, that's a liability, right, to them in terms of what we value and what we prize when it comes to fame and beauty and youth. And I really thought this was an opportunity to talk about menopause in a completely different context. I think we conflate middle age and menopause. Aging and menopause can happen simultaneously, but they're not the same thing. And to deal with the physiology of menopause is very different than saying, I'm getting old, right? Everybody wants to be cute and old and like, sitting on a bench with their partner, like holding hands, but nobody wants to age. And one, I think we need to take the stigma out of both. But for me, menopause can cause so much life interruption that affects the way we think about aging. And so we can't really celebrate aging because we've got this impediment to it, this impediment to kind of, all of the overwhelmingly wonderful opportunities we do have at this stage of life become marred by all of the physical, mental, emotional symptoms of menopause. And I was like, well, somebody's got to start talking about it
Yeah.
and make some noise, right? I mean, that's what you're doing.
Well, you've kicked things off. I feel like do you feel like it's changed since you got into this? Like, do you?
Well, yes, I was going to say, yeah, but that's probably because now I'm living it 24/7. Like
That's the
now
thing.
it went from being, oh, this is my problem to this is a problem.
Yeah.
And the minute that you start to dig in, you start to find your others, you start to find your people. And, I very much believe in tribalism when it comes to this particular topic. I think that as people, we need to band together around not just normalizing, but optimizing this conversation and really like talking about menopause for what it is. I'm not big on sugarcoating it. It's hell.
Right.
And I think that for a lot of people, it's, they're very lucky if they get away with, light symptoms or short, a short duration of symptoms. But for some people like me who couldn't go on hormones, I really suffered almost every single common symptom that you can have, and even some uncommon symptoms.
Right.
But because they were sandwiched in between a pretty significant spine surgery and the death of my father, I attributed perimenopause mostly to either the surgery and the kind of psychology that, having your spine worked on requires, and having a titanium spine,
Right.
and grief, right? That grief can show up in physical ways. So when my father passed away of heart disease, I started having symptoms that were very similar to his. And I thought that was grief working itself out.
Right.
I did not know that my heart palpitations didn't have anything to do with my dad dying and everything to do with perimenopause. So I never thought about going into menopause. It never occurred to me that it was going to happen to me. I don't know why. Nobody talks about it. I was like, menopause, schmenopause, like who cares?
Well, it's a far off day, right? It's such a far off day. And like, I think this age is you just go, oh, like someday is here. Like so it just hits you, right? Like there's no someday, like someday is here and all this is happening.
Well, it's funny that you say that. When I turned 50, I remember thinking my some days are over. My some days are today.
Yeah.
Someday is today.
I've been saying that since I turned 50. Yeah. I've been saying there is no someday. Like whatever you decide you want to do within reason, you make a plan. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, age brings a lot of things with it, right? We talk very much in our culture, particularly through this kind of patriarchal lens of what women are supposed to look like or be like or do. This idea that, at 50, it's sort of you're tapping out, right? Your earning potential is supposed to drop and, you're losing your looks. And I still like laugh at that phrase because I'm like, where did they go? What do you mean? Like, I haven't lost anything. I look in the mirror, I'm still there. But dealing with, physical changes, but there are so many great things about age. There's so many wonderful things about experience and wisdom. And we tend to lose those because we are also experiencing menopause, which can, really, if you'll excuse the expression, fuck with us. Like, there is so much going on in your brain when you lose so much estrogen. It's not just estrogen. We know it's progesterone and testosterone and estradiol and, all of these things, are estradiol. I never know how to say it. But anyway, it is all of these things that I think contribute to what we've always kind of lumped culturally into a midlife crisis, a female, midlife crisis. And now we have so much more information. This is not a physiological just problem. This is one about medical and surgical menopause, gender affirming menopause, and gender non-binary menopause. These are things that we don't talk about. And yet the symptoms can be so severe and there's no relief. There's no answers. There's not a ton of information, although that's changing.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Electra Health's 21st Century Guide to Menopause. I think it's a great primer for feeling like, oh, this is what's happening to me. You and I both know knowledge is power, right? You can't sugarcoat the experience, but you can have agency over this experience. And that, I think, goes a long way to changing the experience itself, right? When you don't know what's happening to you, it's scary, it's confusing.
I think you had a similar, like my 40s was just, well, everything's clear in hindsight. It was just me not having a clue what was wrong. I had terrible health anxiety because
Yeah.
I think inside every woman's mind, it's like, there's something horribly wrong with me. Like there has to be, because I feel so horrible. But
Yeah.
when you said you were attributing your symptoms to your father's death, and I'm so sorry, and your surgery, and you were saying it's those things. I'm doing this every single day. And I still say, oh, you're tired because you were up late on Saturday and
Right.
you had
Right.
many drinks on Friday and you had, like, you're sad about that thing that happened. You're sad about, like, I'm still, and my friends know I do this and they'll still be like, well, what do you think it is? And even though I know intellectually and I'm doing it every day, I still connect it. It's like really hard.
Yeah, and I think that that's because that's what you do for your entire life
Yeah.
before menopause, right? I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things that really, and I have talked about this before. My brain fog was so bad. I said to my therapist, like, I think I have early onset Alzheimer's, and I was in a panic constantly. Like I have had issues with anxiety and depression my whole life, but the way that the character, the shape, or whatever, I don't even know how to explain it, the depth of the feeling
Yeah.
became so different. And you're absolutely right. In hindsight, I realized this probably started at around 44 or 45, but it wasn't until I was 47 that I really started to experience, what the major symptoms are in perimenopause, right? The hot flashes, the night sweats, the brain fog, the insomnia, the weight gain, the body weight redistribution, the food allergies, the dry skin, the joint pain. I mean, you name it, it happened. And I was like, this is why, I don't have long to live. It's exactly what
Yeah.
I started to feel like, wow, maybe what happened to my dad is already happening to me. Maybe
And
there's something genetic going on here. I had no idea. And that's the thing that I found so tricky. I found myself, certainly with meno rage, like I was like this short fuse all the time. And part of that, I think, just came from, I mean, aside from the loss of estrogen, it came from literally not feeling like myself.
yeah.
And I think that that becomes one of the biggest hurdles that we face when we get to menopause, chronologically anyway, right? When you are in middle age, this is the typical age, can start as early as 39. We know that 51 is sort of the average. But that's for menopause, right? That's also like a year of not getting your period anymore. Perimenopause can last before and after that. And for me, it was after. It was after I stopped getting my period that I really started to feel crazy.
Oh,
And so
really?
even though I wasn't getting my period, it never occurred to me it was menopause. I was like, oh, maybe it was the surgery. Maybe my body's in shock. Like I
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
it is exactly what you're saying. Sorry to go in a circular motion, but to get back to your point, it is this idea of we continue to attribute these things to anything but menopause, as if somehow that makes sense to our world. And I think that's because menopause is so it's such an amorphous topic. There are so many amorphous symptoms that it is easier to try and explain it away through things we understand
Yeah.
rather than really dig into what menopause is. And look, there's shame around it. I think, when we talk about this stigma, the biggest stigma is the sense of shame, which to me is completely unwarranted once you understand what's going on.
Well, once you start, I mean, have you found, I'm not ashamed at all. I talk about it all the time. I could care less now, but that's because I'm talking about it all the time. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I've had a couple of situations where my trainer, I talked about it to him the first time and you're like, oh God, he's not going to, and then you do it and it's fine. And then I was
Right.
dating someone and I was like, what's he going to think? And then I told him and it was fine, obviously. And so, but do you find like it's connected with you talking about it all the time? Like what's changed since you started?
Honestly, since I started talking about it, I feel like I'm just this receptacle for information. Like I learn more and more and more. The more I talk about it, certainly, it was like among friends, it was like, oh my God, is this happening to you? Right. And, and not being able to share freely unless you were talking to the people that are closest to you.
Yeah.
And now it's become so much more of an interesting conversation. And, there are a lot of companies like mine that are popping up all over the place. So that's great, because I think that one, there certainly aren't even a fraction of the companies needed to really be addressing this from different perspectives, right? Whether it's medical or lifestyle or, over the counter or coaching or telehealth. I mean, there are a zillion things that we need to be looking at to make this a much more kind of rich community. But what I do see is that, there's hope, right? What's happening right now is I think we're seeing the needle really move in the right direction. And I think, looking back, I just wasn't as involved in the community. So I felt very much alone. And now that I am connected to so many communities and I talk to people every day and I want to know what people are looking for, how I can be helpful and meet the needs of this community, I'm inundated by it. So it doesn't even occur to me that it's something weird to talk about.
No.
And listen, the funny thing is that, when I think about our consumer, for state of menopause, I have to think very seriously about who wants to shout this from the rooftops and who doesn't. There are still a lot of people who don't want to talk about these symptoms, and yet they still want relief for them. So how do you reach them? How do you talk to them in a way that doesn't make them feel even more ashamed and allows them to feel comfortable around getting the help that they need? And that's really important, because not everybody is going to talk about it the way we're talking about it. Not yet, anyway. My hope is that the work that we do now gives people permission to start talking about it more freely. And certainly the generations that come after us will know what to expect.
Yeah.
We've talked about puberty, pregnancy, infertility. Infertility was a really tough one for us culturally to talk about. It's painful. But, this I look at this as sort of the final frontier of hormonal health, and we know nothing about it. Nobody prepared us for it. And to sit silently and suffer when it's so unnecessary, that to me is the biggest issue. Is like, we can't let people feel less than. We can't let people's self-esteem, fall through the floor just because they're not informed. It's like what I did for styling, I really believe very much in this idea of self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-esteem comes from addressing what is going on externally, because that forces an internal psychological shift. And so when I think about the idea that I had a hot flash in the middle of a hugely important meeting a few years ago, and I was so embarrassed that I went to the front desk of this office and I said, "Do you have a towel?" Because I couldn't go back into the meeting. My clothes were sticking to me. I mean, it looked like I had taken a shower. And when I think about the fact that it never occurred to me to make a joke about it, or it never occurred to me to be like, hot flash happening, anything, because I was so mortified. And I'm like, I look back on that and I feel sad for that person. I feel sad for that woman who sat in that meeting, like, white knuckling through it and having to secretly go look for a towel.
You felt ashamed the whole time. You felt ashamed the whole time. Why?
The whole time. And, certainly a hot flash gives me more anxiety. Some people say they get anxious and then they get a hot flash. For me, it's the opposite, because I think that the anxiety is attached to shame and like being, the person who's like, is it hot in here or is it just me? All of those things that wind up happening. And I felt so strongly during the pandemic, really, is when I started to think about this. Before the pandemic, I had gone to LA. I thought it was time to pitch a new show. And I really honestly wanted to do one about multi-generational learning, right? And multi-generational mentorship. But what it was really about was how to kind of pivot in midlife, how to be a person who falls between the industrial and the technological revolution and not really being, having one foot in each camp and not really being part of either, and figuring out what life can look like and learning from younger generations how to adapt to what the future is going to look like. And I was completely shot down. People, thought it wasn't a very interesting story to tell. And for me, it really became about like, well, what does that mean for me? If
Yeah.
I'm not going to do what I've done for 20 years,
Mhm.
what is my kernel of truth, and what do I do? What are my skills, it was never about styling, right? When I look back on what not to wear, it was never about the clothes. It was about what the clothes could do.
Right.
And for me, I started to think about, well, what am I struggling with? What am I struggling with? Because from the personal comes the universal. And that's when I was like, okay, menopause felt like this overwhelming rock that I was trying to push up a mountain. What if I did this with other people?
Yeah.
What if I entered this conversation not with a question, but with a solution?
Mhm.
And that to me was the reason to start with product and start with that over community, because I know those communities are there.
Yeah.
And those communities, those are the communities that I wanted to rally around. So, I talk about this a lot, the idea that, like, why would I launch a product line before, finding this product market fit? Well, the product market fit was already there. People are desperate for product, and they're desperate for rapid relief, at the moment of onset symptoms, which I feel very strongly about. There are other ways to look at this, which is longer term supplements or, hormones. There's a huge spike now in people taking HRT and bioidenticals, none of which has anything to do with what I wanted to do, which was be in the moment. You don't feel good. Here's something you can put on,
Okay.
right? That's a very different thing. And it's sort of compatible with all of the other things you may be doing for menopausal symptoms. But I wanted to be a little bit like that, the things that I did in style. Like, if you put this dress on,
Yeah.
it's going to make you feel a lot better than that dress, right? That's the idea.
Even when you were describing the products to me when we were emailing, I was laughing because it's like, I feel like she's pulling out belts and like big scarves, like saying, put this sweater, because you were like, I can't remember what, you were like the arnica and I put the CBD. It really felt like that. I was like, I'm getting styled, but like with nice smelling products from afar.
Yeah. Well, it's actually funny. I mean, that's actually a really great way to describe it, because lately, when people are like, why did you do this? I realized that menopause needed a makeover. Like, that's really what it is.
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Come on.
And, you are doing the work. I mean, there are so many wonderful people that I've met who are now, like, clearly in it and doing the work. But, it's wonderful to have had a previous platform that now I can share, I can use to a different kind of advantage. And, to meet the needs, the massive needs of this community feels so important. Like, not to be so earnest about it, but it does feel like, wow, this is something that has given me new meaning and a renewed sense of purpose and a renewed sense of excitement. Because I was like, frankly, I'm kind of, I love style. Style is part of my DNA. But what is another way to help people transform? What is another way to get people to look at the lens of themselves, right? The lens through which they look at themselves differently. How do we change it out? And so you're right. I mean, the products are sort of like accessories. That's the idea. If you wear like a really bold earring, don't wear a big necklace with it. Just, let it speak for itself. If you want a belt, add that. There's enough surface area in between. All of the things that I would say really do apply to the idea that if menopause and the symptoms of menopause are interrupting your daily life, then you need something to help you get through that. It's going to make you happier. It's going to make you more comfortable. It's going to make you feel less ashamed. And you will be able to do all the things you want to do. All of your some days are today, right? And that means that menopause is hard. That is the one thing that I will not sugarcoat. I think that it is hard on almost every level that we can talk about it, but it isn't hopeless, and you aren't helpless. And that's the more important thing.
It's such a strange transition because it's everything. Like when you talk about I see myself so much because I was always in journalism and I lost my job when I was 47 in a really embarrassing way. Like the newspaper was sold. It was like, but I was already like, I felt like I had golden handcuffs, that feeling.
Yeah,
I couldn't imagine anything. And then I left and I ended up freelancing and starting something else and getting energized. Like I started a website and I'm like, okay, like this can, And then I found this, and it was like a synergy of all the things that I've always kept up with. And I liked social media, but it seems to me like to you, like you were also searching for a purpose, like maybe television.
Absolutely.
We're done. Like, even though you were pitching that show, was it in your heart? Did you really want to do that show? Would you like, you
Well,
did.
I did want to do that show because I did want to do something about middle age.
Different.
And I really thought, well, I'm not like the new hot style thing on the block. I know that, that if you have an Instagram account, you can be an influencer, and that's not me.
Mhm.
And television, it's certainly the reality television that I was doing when I started What Not to Wear. It was 2002. It was before the Twitters and the Instagrams, even Facebook. And it was a very different medium then. And it's the one that I know best.
Yeah.
And it was it was the medium that I certainly felt most comfortable in. But honestly, it wasn't that I didn't want to do it. It was that my fear was that exactly, I think what happened was this idea that it would not be interesting to executives who are going after millennials and Gen Z, in a way that I don't really appeal to. And, coming to terms with that, I think was difficult, but it wasn't that I wanted to leave television. It was that if television wasn't going to be the medium by which I could get a message across, then
Yeah.
what was it going to be? I am not a social media like influencer at all. I don't know how to use a ring light. I don't know how to use a filter. I mean, half the time when I do a live, I point the camera at the wall. So,
Right.
I was like, what is it that is going to get me into the conversations that I want to be in with the people that I want to be in conversation with? The same people that I would want to be talking to about style, about what does a career pivot look like in middle age? What does middle age feel like, and why do we struggle with it so much? Why do we prize youth so much? Why do we have all of these stigmas attached when, our generation, which is, Gen X, I think we are a bunch of glass ceiling breakers. And I think that we have opened and paved the road for younger generations. And I feel like sometimes, particularly in a lot of what we're seeing in terms of, sort of social revolutions, that's getting lost because there are things that we don't know and things that we didn't pay attention to. And that's what this next generation teaches us. So one of the things that I think that is really true about that is sort of redefining the menopause experience, redefining middle age, redefining what it means to be thrown into menopause for reasons other than age, and how we deal with both physical and mental health, right? I mean, one of the things that I have always been interested in psychology, but what I realize is that, there was certainly, when I was growing up, a huge stigma around mental illness and mental health. I don't like to say mental illness, but there was such a big stigma around it. And one of the things that I really felt about menopause was that my mental health kind of like went out the window. Like I just did not know what I was going to feel when. And if you compound that with, the kind of grueling PT for spine surgery, or, the pain of grief, it was just like, it was like menopause hormone overload. And that, to me, that wasn't going to be, getting into that conversation, getting that deep, that personal, that existential even, was going to be hard to do on a TV show, right? The thing about a television show is that it's very visual. And that's why style is such a great place for it, right? That's why transformation is so beloved on camera, is because it's the Cinderella story.
Mm.
But it's much harder to talk about things that are darker and deeper, when you're just talking about them and not showing them.
I
So
saw
for
that
me,
with sorry to interrupt, but the Apple show with Oprah, I found that with it. I was watching it and I was like, look, I love this conversation more than anything, but I'm getting bored of watching it. And I was mad
I'm
at
getting bored
myself.
of watching two people sit in a chair.
I was, 'cause
Exactly.
it was just all people talking. And I was like, I wonder if any other people are having this reaction, because we're just used to
Well,
watching razzmatazz, right?
yeah, we're used to watching things. I agree with you. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but I absolutely agree with you. Television is not the right medium. That's why we have podcasts. That's the point, is that you can listen to a podcast while you're doing other things. You can absorb information while you're, exercising or cooking, and not sitting in front of a television with two people in a chair. even the kind of idea of a talk show to me is getting a little boring. It's not what it was. And that's certainly not to say that the golden age of television is over, but certainly in terms of unscripted television or reality television, I think we've moved past that because we have TikTok. We have reels. We don't need to be sitting in front of our TV unless we're watching something scripted and we're watching something entertaining. And that's where, Netflix killed it. That's where, Amazon Prime and Hulu and Apple are all killing it, not in reality or unscripted television. They're doing this for, people to escape. And that's certainly what we needed during the pandemic more than ever. Yeah. But, and my girlfriend and I literally watched the internet. I mean, we got into murder mysteries in the Czech Republic, in Iceland. I mean, you name it, we saw it. So, I think that I really had to contemplate how else you can get a big message across. And to me, it was, start a company with a mission. Why not? Why not? Because there is no someday.
There's no someday. And sorry, I didn't mean to, but I'm so curious how television and the world of business, like that, making that transition.
Yeah, well,
it's imposter syndrome. Do you have imposter?
I mean, of course I have imposter syndrome, but I have some great advisors, and I will tell you that some of them have said to me, nobody knows what the fuck they're doing. So I feel pretty good about that. The learning curve to not just start a business, but to start an e-commerce business, a D2C business, a consumer product goods business. None of this is in my wheelhouse. Creative brand direction was in my wheelhouse, and telling people what to wear, right? But my passion for this is so strong and has really grown exponentially. It makes the hard stuff worth doing, even though it's so hard. When I worry about quality control and risk assessment and inventory reconciliation, the learning curve that I've had in the last 6 months has been astronomical. But I'll tell you one thing it did teach me is that neuroplasticity is real. Yes. And our brains can learn lots of new things. You can teach any old dog new tricks.
Oh my God.
And it is also one of the things that I feel so strongly about showing and not telling is that, I'm 52 years old and I am going to do something new. And some people are very excited by that. And other people are like, I don't care what you do. You're the style lady.
Right.
So it's also, kind of getting people with preconceived notions about me to shift those notions. And the only way to do that is by doing it and talking about it.
Yeah. You raise an interesting point, because I have worked so hard in the last year, but I have felt such a sense of purpose, and the learning curve is unbelievable. Like every single thing I need to do, I have to learn and figure out how to do it myself. But I feel that's made me happier. And I'm trying to say to my friends, the ones who have kids and have been, worked in a government job for 20 years, I want to say, if you just take a course, just take one course, because a lot of women don't know this. They haven't been forced to do it. What do you feel that? Just the fact of doing this has enervated me.
I do. I think that it's animated me quite a bit. I mean, I can't lie. I cry at least once a day, and I'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning like, oh, I can't breathe. Oh my God, I have so many things to do, and everything is going to go wrong. And, it's not so much imposter syndrome as catastrophic fear.
Yeah.
Reality,
it's real.
I'm worried that, the other shoe is going to drop. There's going to be another catastrophe. Well, P.S., welcome to CEO life. And that is also reminding myself, I have to take a beat. I have to take a breath. I have to step away from the computer. I have to do those things in order to be an effective leader of a company, right? But what I realized, and to your point, I think it is really important that we challenge ourselves. And I was one of those people growing up that I never wanted to be embarrassed when I wasn't good at something. So if I wasn't good at it, if I wasn't going to win, I wasn't going to play. And I missed the entire opportunity of what learning is actually about, because I was so afraid of, being bad at something that I never let myself realize that to get good at something, really good at something, you just have to work every day at it. I mean, consistency is everything. So, I took swimming lessons when I was 45 because I didn't want to swim as a kid because I didn't think I was very good at it. And so I really believe in this idea of trying things you don't think you can do. And a big believer in this idea that keeping your mind entertained, occupied, activated is so important. My stepmother is 70, and during the pandemic, she took art history courses online. She took a Dante course online, and she loves going to the museum. She loves going to the Philharmonic. Like, she was doing museum tours online. I was so impressed with the way that she motivated herself. And I think that once you get in a rut, whether it's 20 years of the same job, or you're busy raising children, or whatever it is that you kind of can't escape, right? It makes it very hard for you to see that there are other things that you can do to kind of make your life more interesting to you, not to other people. Who gives a shit what other people think? But really, like, in a way that kind of excites you, that ignites your imagination.
Yeah.
And we forget that. The older we get, I think we start to think, well, like, that's not me, that's not my life. There's a lot of resignation that happens at this stage if we don't catch it. If we don't say, wait a second, this is my life. It is not anybody else's to live or to fix or to change. It is my responsibility. And the minute that you're willing to say that, well, then you have to take responsibility for the things that you aren't changing and those that you are willing to change.
When you say that, like, literally when I had like a terribly hard year, I had like sort of, I guess, as close to a breakdown as you can have, just convergence of like loss of relationship, loss of job, just that thing that flattens you, which I think maybe you need sometimes in life, But when you said that,
you only get to a midlife renaissance by having a midlife crisis.
Right.
That is my feeling.
The moment that it all came to, I was in my kitchen. It was about 6 months after I was making tea, and I was thinking, how can anyone let me be like this? Like, doesn't anyone know how bad I feel? Like, how can people, why don't they care? Like, no one cares that I'm sitting here. And then it was just like, no one's coming. No one's coming. No one's coming.
But I honestly believe that also comes from our generation, and maybe generations before us. And I see this less in younger generations, but this idea that somebody is coming to save us.
Yeah.
That is what we were taught, even though my mom was, a second wave feminist and burning her bra. And like, she was one of the first VCs, like female VCs, to really succeed in that, area of business. For all the achievements of our parents' generation, there were a lot of things they didn't achieve. And I think that one of the things that they did sort of, kind of even subconsciously instill in us was this idea of somebody is coming to save you. It will all work out because somebody is coming to save you. Instead of really instilling in us this idea of, an individuality and owning our own actions and things like that. And maybe some of that just comes with maturity. As a kid, of course, your parents are going to save you. Well, hopefully, they'll be there to save you, or someone, a guardian will be there for you. But, I certainly didn't feel for a long time, I didn't feel safe in the world. I didn't feel like I could rely on myself for a lot of things. And maybe that's also what age and wisdom and experience give you, is the knowledge that you can depend on yourself. You are the one to get yourself through things. And look, this goes right back to what we're talking about with menopause. You don't have to lose agency if you know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we lose agency and maybe we flatten out, or we have like our breakdown or our crisis, because that's the moment. That's the moment where if you don't pick yourself up, who the hell is going to? And that is maybe why it's the most important, most poignant moment that we have.
It's just all wrapped up together. How can you possibly separate it? I just think I can't, I feel like the menopause transition itself is like, has in it, it's like a hero's journey. It has to be, because you have this sort of dark night when you think you can't go on, or many of them. And you just have to say, like, who am I? Why am I here? who am I going to be? And am I going to take care of myself through it? You know? And I think even I have friends who've been married for a long time, and I have never gotten married. I've been single quite a lot, but I've had relationships. But I'm like, you guys need to figure this out too, because I think your marriages aren't as happy as they could be because I think you're expecting him to fix how you feel. And
Fix it. Yeah.
so this is something that I see, like a realization that everyone needs to make. I wanted to ask you about, like, you had the grief from your father. There is evidence about adverse childhood experiences, trauma, whatever you want to talk about it. And you've been in therapy.
Yes.
How do you feel that's connected? Like, I'm working through all that and it's so freeing. I just wondered how you felt about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is absolutely true. And, before I spoke with Dr. Jen Gunter, who wrote the Menopause Manifesto, which when I read her book, she talks a lot about childhood trauma, really actually being, a big part of how we're formed, how our brains are formed, everything, and how we deal with any kind of experience. And certainly menopause, is going to feel, I think that there are parts of menopause that truly feel traumatic. And I think that's the kind of callback that comes from having had traumatic childhood experiences. And, when we talk about the word traumatic, I think a lot of people think that is dramatic and an over exaggeration, when I think it actually is absolutely the right word. We are not here to kind of place, whose trauma was more traumatic than somebody else's. I think the idea is that if you have a traumatic experience as a child, that stays with you. That doesn't go away. And when you are faced with other kinds of trauma, there is this recall that happens that makes it compounds the present day trauma. It compounds it because, your brain doesn't realize that, time has passed. So, or maybe your subconscious doesn't realize that time has passed. But I completely agree that, our ability to deal with certain kinds of physical or mental or emotional trauma is all wrapped up in what has happened to us in our lives, right? Our environment is very important. And certainly the people who were most responsible for us when we were young are the ones who either leave us feeling empowered or helpless. And I certainly have had a little bit of both. And when I talk about the grief around my father, he was my biggest cheerleader. I loved him very, very much. But our relationship was complicated. And having a complicated relationship with your parent when you lose them is very difficult to unpack, because there's no more chatting about it. There's no more confrontational conversation about, like, why did you do this? There's none of that. And it is a one-sided conversation that has to be about, I guess what the stages of grief really are, right? Which is not about the denial part, right? For me, that wasn't there, but certainly about, this idea of anger being really a huge issue. Not just how could you leave me, which is, I think, primordial. Every child kind of feels that, but much more about how do I resolve the complications in that relationship without, doing more damage to myself or to others in the future. How do I let go of that? How do you get to a place of acceptance where thinking about him isn't just filled with the grief of missing him or the anger of unresolved issues, but the acceptance of having somebody who loved me very much, who was, just as fallible as the rest of us, and move on from there. But that, again, it requires so much unpacking. And it's really heartening to hear that that's something that you're doing as well. I think that almost should be part of what I call secondary grief in menopause. And I call it secondary grief because it is about the loss of certainly chronological menopause. We are saying goodbye to the person who we were. And when I say that, I say most of my adult life, right? I joke around that from like 30 to 47, I pretty much looked the same. Yes, I gained weight, I lost weight, but I pretty much looked the same. And then at about 48, shit started to go south, right? Like my body changed. I started to get crazy. Like I just felt crazy. I was always angry. I mean, like everything that started to go crazy in menopause started to happen. And there is a secondary grief about looking in the mirror and not recognizing who you are. There is a secondary grief in not recognizing why you're moody. There is a secondary grief in not understanding what is happening to you that really feels like you're drowning.
Yeah.
And I saying goodbye to my youth, right, should have been like, or in some cases, I want to make sure I say this correctly, that saying goodbye to youth should not be as painful as the grief, the primary grief of, let's say, saying goodbye to a parent. But for me, they happened at the same time. And maybe sometimes losing a parent is enough reason to feel like I'm not young anymore and triggers that secondary grief, right?
Yeah.
But all of that kind of traumatic experience has to be examined, whether or not it's menopause that brings it on for you or not. It has a significant effect on the way that you exist in the world.
Oh yeah. I lost my mom when I was 27, and my very best friend lost her mom last year. And I just saw her going through all the things that I went through at 27, but I didn't know, because at 27, I feel like I was an idiot. I don't know. I'd love to talk to myself. I'm sure I wasn't, but I mean, I read my diaries and I was like, but you just kind of think of yourself as like this raving lunatic.
I think of myself at 27, I was like an amoeba. You know what I mean? Like I
do nothing.
And that's the joke of youth being wasted on the young, is that, like, if I could talk to that person now, there are so many things that I would tell her, like not to stress about, or stop holding grudges, or stop being so mean, all of these things that were sort of automatic defense mechanisms for me.
Right.
When I felt scared, or I felt like I was having imposter syndrome, or I felt insecure, that I wish I had done differently. Yeah. But, the idea of being vulnerable, certainly Brené Brown gave us that permission to be vulnerable in a way that I think has revolutionized the way we talk about vulnerability. But certainly growing up, I didn't feel that you were allowed to be vulnerable. I felt that was law.
I'm curious, you haven't had children. I don't know if you wanted children. I haven't had children. Did you have, even though you didn't want them? I was ambivalent. I didn't meet someone to have them. I didn't meet a suitable person. Perhaps if I had, I would have. I kind of wanted them. I have a bit of grief about it. Sometimes I have like a deep grief and then it passes. But I wondered if you feel like that's part of it, or
not for me. I mean, I think, look, I never really wanted children. And part of that was because I just didn't think I would be a great mom. Really, honestly, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I could do it
either.
Yeah. I mean, I have a dog, and if it wasn't for my girlfriend, I don't know if the dog would still be alive. It concerns me that, that I wouldn't have been a great parent to a person. And part of it also is that, yes, the secondary grief, again, I think this is part of it, that I may have experienced a little bit, wasn't that I couldn't, that I had somehow missed my opportunity to have children. It's just that my body could no longer do something it had always been able to do from the age of 13, right? That is the same. That's the same thing as, no longer being able to ride a bike, or that's a bad example. Like, you know what I mean? Like your body changes significantly enough for you not to be able to do something. Yes. It's sort of the way actually having spine surgery meant I couldn't do yoga anymore, right? Like that's a better example. It's like even though it's certainly not the same degree of severity or seriousness, it's just the idea that my body doesn't allow me to do something that I took for granted. Yeah. And I think that's the bigger thing, right? When that moment has passed, that's the thing that you look back on and you think, wow, I didn't even know that my body was powerful enough for all of that. And that and you lose that power at a certain point. And, I had a conversation when I was talking to Jen Gunter about her grandmother theory. This idea that, we live past the age that we can become pregnant to be helpful in the family structure, right? That we allow, being the grandmother means you can take care of the children when the mother is exhausted, or you can forage when the mother is, concentrating on caring for the child. And, whoever the patriarch, I mean, I don't know what to call it, because she's talking about a very patriarchal family structure, is out hunting, that somehow the grandmother plays this very important role in helping the population continue, right? That there's like some sort of continuum. And I am unsure how I feel about that theory. Part of me like understands it's like, civilization and its discontents and what, Freud explained to us the family structure and why that holds the fabric of society together. But these are all sort of male-centered ideas. And even though, Jen is certainly a feminist, the idea of the grandmother being this ancillary person in a family while supporting the family structure, sure, I buy some of that, but not all of it, because there are a lot of us that never wanted children. So grandmother role does not suit us. There are some people who absolutely, especially in the gender non-binary community, who never felt like having the reproductive organs to have children, felt that they felt no connection to.
Yeah.
So there are people that lie outside this kind of theory that sort of don't disprove it, but don't prove it either. And for me, it's really about how can we look at age, regardless of reproductive health, as something in and of itself to celebrate. And it becomes, I think, a much more complicated situation when you look at sociobiology, right? Men can't give birth. If they could, and maybe someday they will be able to, certainly with the kinds of operations that we're seeing that are becoming possible, that may level the playing field so that, we talk more about women less in terms of their use value to family and more about their use value to humanity.
Well, I was going to say that because Susan Mattern, she's a historian, and she writes about it in her book, which I haven't been able to read yet. But her sort of reframing of it is, we stop having children because we have things to do. And like just this month, there's new research because whales are the only ones who have menopause besides us, we think. And they always thought it was this one kind of whale that was very much like that. Like they were taking care of the kids and they stayed in the pod. But they've just found that it's another killer whales who don't stay in the pod. The men and women leave and they still go through menopause for just as long as the other whales. So I just think, no, I just, because I don't have kids, and for all the other people I'm trying to include here, because I'm trying to be inclusive, I'm like, I'm just taking that theory and making it apply to all of us. We have things to do. It's taking care of the tribe can be part of the greater tribe. What you're doing, what I'm doing, what we're all doing, which is being useful to the community.
Yes.
And how more useful can you be in the world is if you find what you're doing that makes you light up. And like, I don't know. So I know what you mean. And I was the same, but I believe that.
I absolutely believe in what you're saying. And you kind of said it a lot more eloquently and a lot more succinctly than I did, but I absolutely agree. I think there is a much bigger question about looking at what have traditionally been this kind of gender-based roles, and not so much about humanity and roles, and that we are as a society moving much faster than our physiobiology, and in a lot of ways I think that holds us back from being able to kind of think about things in a different way, about this idea that supporting a community is actually just an enlarged family, right? I mean, this is why I was saying I believe so much in tribalism. You find your people and you support them, you support the shit out of them, and that's that, again, at this stage, I certainly feel much more about being collaborative than I do about being competitive.
Yes.
And part of that competition comes from a certain kind of Darwinism in sociobiology that frankly doesn't apply anymore. Like I am not fighting, a bunch of other women to like make sure I'm the one who has a baby. Like that's not it. These are the women that I want to be around and I want to support them. And then hopefully that's a reciprocal relationship. That's very different from what we have always seen as these traditional roles. And, we're seeing this in terms of race, in terms of gender, that these are constructs that we have created that we can, systemically dismantle and think about in a different way. And ageism is certainly one of them, and that is, again, not to conflate aging and menopause, because I think that they really have to be considered separately and sort of adjacently. But when we're talking about chronological menopause and middle age, I think that this is an incredible opportunity for particularly people our age to kind of say, well, fuck what came before us. We are going to rewrite the rules here, because the rules are being rewritten in so many other areas. Why not this? Yeah. And I wrote an article for Refinery 29 when I was 47 about how my style had changed and how it never occurred to me that my style would change. I'd spent so many years dressing in pencil skirts and floral tops, and although I am wearing a floral top today, on what not to wear, that I was never, that was just part of my style, right? When I wasn't on camera, I was, wearing jumpsuits and leather pants and things that I never thought were appropriate for the show. And I had to come to terms with the fact that not only was that also part of my style, that as I aged, I wanted different things. I wasn't interested in wearing clothing that was constantly being thought of as sexualized or objectified, that I really wanted to wear suits, that I wanted that gravitas, that I wanted to walk into a room and really felt like I owned it. And I talked a little bit about the fact that I think it was 2012 that every major fashion house had an older woman, I say in quotes, in their ad campaigns. Joan Didion was in Celine, Cher was in Marc Jacobs, Julia Roberts was Givenchy. The list went on and on and on. And my concern, which is exactly what happened, was that it was a trend. It was a fad. It was a statement for a second. It didn't move the needle. It made older women feel seen for about 5 minutes. And then we went back to young kids again. And so while I see there is certainly when it comes to race now, a lot more diversity in every area, we're seeing a lot more of that is front and center. Ageism always gets kind of pushed to the side because it is definitely something that happens to women and people who identify as women much more than it happens to men. It's just the facts. Right. I mean, George Clooney gets to get old and, he's distinguished looking. And, we have very few women in that same category. We're starting to see more, I would argue Tilda Swinton is probably the most glorious. Helen Mirren, Judi Dench.
I wanted to ask you something that I think you'll know. So I became obsessed last summer. There are more magazine covers with women in their 50s and 40s than there's ever been, I feel like that Health magazine. Health magazine. They had 6 out of 12 covers were women in their late 40s or 50s. No mention of menopause. I think I saw Naomi Watts was on the cover of Women's Health. I mean, it was just like every month there's an old star on the cover of these magazines, not a mention, not a whisper. And because I used to be a journalist, I'm like, are the celebrities saying, don't ask me about that? Or are the journalists too young to think to ask them? Because Naomi Watts said, she brought up, Naomi Watts said, I invested in a company because my skin was changing due to hormones. And then I would have said, what do you mean? But,
well, again, to be fair, I think that is menopause is still taboo, particularly for celebrities who are, being cast on their looks and their beauty, and that there aren't as many roles for women as they age, right? Yeah. So you always kind of want to talk around the topic of menopause. Yeah. That's what I think is happening in a lot of cases. Because again, there is this stigma attached to being past your expiration date. But if you just recently saw Red Table Talk, Salma Hayek had an incredible conversation about menopause. And I was like, go, lady, go.
Everyone was. She made the movie. Amazing. She made the character of menopause and she's talking about it in I couldn't even believe it. But I still think it's a common, Sharon Stone had her book tour. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but before we get Sharon, I did want to say that, also I think health and women's health understand who their demo is. Right. And so even if they're not talking about menopause, they understand that an older actor, as opposed to a 20-year-old, is going to be something they're interested in, right? So obviously, as a journalist, magazines are trying to reach their core demographic and grow it. And, but if Salma Hayek is on the cover of InStyle this month and looks amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. Yep. And those are the things, Laura Brown as an editor, I think is very smart in moving the needle in a lot of directions. Melissa McCarthy, she is paying attention reading the room in a really smart way. And being able to combine both what is, the cultural icons of the moment with people who may not always be in the spotlight, but really have something to offer in terms of the aging conversation.
And I think we have to be aware, like you said, we're in it all the time. You can't just shove it in everyone's face, right? Like people are going to have to slowly like sidle up to it. Menopause.
Yeah, they're going to have to sidle up to it. Like exactly.
We did until we were in
cocktail party. Right. Yeah, exactly. You want to meet somebody and you sidle up to them at a cocktail party. It's sort of the same thing. No, I agree. I mean, listen, we are still in the nascent stage of this becoming a front and center cultural conversation. I think we're seeing it a lot more in the investment world. Certainly there are a lot of companies that are trying to, come up and start getting funded. And we are but one of many. But I think that, that's where the conversation starts in a way, because it's very important for people to know that there are products for them to buy.
Yeah.
Rather than just think that they have to admit to it or talk about it, right? Yeah. They need to know that there is something out there that will help them with something that at first they may feel ashamed about. Maybe they come to the product and the solution first, and then they're willing to say to their best friend or their community or out loud to anybody, this worked for me, right? And that's a little bit, I think, how we get around, ooh, this is a tough topic. Is that, if we give people agency, then they want to talk about something that they have been able to manage and conquer, as opposed to, help me, I'm drowning, right? Because then it does feel a little bit like, oh, we're in distress. Who is helping us?
Yeah.
And look, the medical industry has not done enough in terms of what menopause could look like, should look like, how it could be talked about. Because in medical school, there's 2 hours of menopause training, and 1 in 4 doctors does not feel comfortable discussing menopause. Are you kidding me? Like, isn't that your job? Yeah. I mean, I had one OBGYN, say to me, well, use it or lose it. And I was like, that's what you're going to tell me about menopause? That's what you're going to tell me about how I'm feeling? Oh, it's
I don't feel like using it.
No. And it does make you feel like what you're feeling is wrong somehow. It's incorrect. It's not, it is what it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. To me, that's an awful feeling.
Well, use it or lose it is like, I get it, but it also goes back to like, what am I, just a person that's there for sexual satisfaction for myself and for other people? Like, I'm more than that. It's like, use it or lose it is just reduces you to sort of that thing that women sometimes get reduced to, right?
Well, look, again, even in terms of sexual wellness, like, I still think this is based on reproductive health. It's not based on hormonal health, and those are separate things.
Yeah.
And, again, I mean, look, I applaud Naomi Watts for even talking about the fact that, her skin was changing due to hormones. At least that opens up the conversation, and I think that it's also important that, like, we note that there is this difference. Like, Salma Hayek may be the first, but she won't be the last to talk about menopause in a movie. And I actually, there was a Netflix series that I didn't watch called Firefly something with Catherine Heigl. Yes. And there is a scene apparently where, she goes into menopause. There's a great monologue in Hacks with Jean Smart on HBO Max about what happens in menopause. And so little by little, the more it enters the cultural mainstream, the easier it's going to be for people to talk about it, right? But it does need to come from voices that you're familiar with, or that, you understand, or that you've seen. Brooke Shields, another example. Like, that company that she was talking about does not specialize in menopause products, but it gave her permission to talk about menopause in a way that made, I think, her feel comfortable. And again, that's important. It's super important.
Okay. Yeah. I wanted to tell you that the products are absolutely beautiful. You sent me this whole package, a couple of, I can't remember. You got CBD oil. You got CBD oil into the UAE. It's not allowed. Well, it's allowed now. I was like, what? Harem. And now it's beautiful. And I love the body cream. I love the cooling spray. I love this. I love the CBD oil and the arnica. It's amazing. I put it on my neck. It helps. And I've been really loving the turmeric. So and the colors of the packaging are so rich and beautiful. I don't even know, like there's kind of, I'll screw them up, but like there's a magenta and like a royal blue and a beautiful sort of teal. And it's like, I feel like it's kind of like an India sort of theme. I don't know. It's
well, actually, you know, I really appreciate that you, more than anything, that you love the product, but second, that you notice the color palette, because jewel tones work on everybody. And that really appealed to me. It really appealed to me. And also, look, you know, in some cases, I feel like a lot of people, when they get to menopausal products, start going into pastels, which I felt very strongly about. Was we don't want to be a summer's eve company. So I really liked the idea of brights mixed with this kind of rich royal gem tone. And you know, again, when we think about what branding and what our branding strategy is, how do we complement those colors with brights or something that feels, you know, sort of you'll notice that the magenta stuff has the CBD oil has like almost like a coral colored cap, right? We want things that sort of feel like fun, fashionable color combinations, because that's in my DNA and that's never going to go away. And I really appreciate the fact that you like the products. One of the things that we're really finding with certainly what I'm calling the rest and renew you know, lane of products, which is all of the magenta products, the turmeric, the CBD oil, the arnica hand cream, and what am I missing? and the lavender bath salts, which, you know, again, people will sort of like bath salts. I'm like, yes, but the concentration of lavender makes it really like a much more potent kind of bath salt than normal. And I think that we've had like a pretty interesting and amazing response to it, which, you know, I was sort of like, bath salts, I don't know. But again, if you are trying to care for yourself, if you are, again, taking control and having agency over what's happening to you, taking a long bath soak in lavender, being able to put on arnica, which, yes, it's joint pain that we made as a hand cream, but I use it on my ankles, my knees, my elbows, any place that I have joint pain, and I seal it with the CBD oil. That one, I feel better. I have less pain. It's easier for me to sleep, you know, because everything is just soothing. And when you talk about the turmeric, I mean, that's sort of the number one natural anti-inflammatory. And, you know, the less inflammation you have in the body, the less pain you have in the body, the less gastrointestinal issues you have in the body. It's better for your skin. I mean, there are a zillion reasons that turmeric is important. And so, you know, I don't see our line as a system of care, which is one of the reasons that I wanted you to be able, I like the idea of lanes, right? So, you know, we have cooling, we have hydration, we have rest and renew, and we have strength. But what I don't like is for you to think, oh, you have to use all of these in any particular order, or you can only use one and you can't layer them. Of course you can. You can use the cooling spray as a toner and use the gel moisturizer over it, because one of the huge issues that I had before my rosacea diagnosis was cystic acne, right? I'm like, it's being a kid all over again. And I was finding that heavy creams were making me break out. So I was using the cooling gel, the cooling spray, the face oil, and then the gel moisturizer to get the same amount of moisture, but keeping my pores from getting clogged.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are a lot of ways to use the products. The idea is you can shop by symptom on the site. And for me, that was the most important change we had to make when we took over the company, was this idea that you would have to know what you were looking for already in order to get anything out of the site. And being able to shop by symptom takes at least one step out of it. Right now, we need you to know that we're here and that, you know, these are the things that we offer for you. But at the same time, when you get to the site, you can shop by symptom. So if you think that you're experiencing menopausal symptoms, you can look for what they are. And by no means have we covered everything. That's the big dream of the company, is to kind of tick off these symptoms one by one and make them available to anybody, because we, listen, everybody has a different set of symptoms. Everybody has them for a different length of time. The severity of the symptoms varies from person to person. And we want to be able to address all symptoms so that you can say, wow, I'm having hot flashes and like my skin is so dry, it feels like paper. And you can get both things, right? Or my joints hurt and you can have a cream for that. But I see the company really being, as I said, rapid release. We want you to feel better now. And our product development is sort of based on that ethos. So, what you're going to see coming from us are things that you can use in the moment. And that is nothing against hormones. If those work for you, great. And I want you to take tons of supplements if that helps you. But as a company, for me, I want you to reach for us the way you would reach for Neosporin if you had a cut.
Yeah, I love it. And you know what? You can talk about, this is one thing. I want to talk about hormones. I want to talk about natural. I want to, all like, it's not an
it's everything.
It's not right. A core conversation, but it says polarized in menopause. Do you find that? It says polarized.
Well, I find it less so, right? Okay. I did, I remember when I first started experiencing menopausal symptoms, I went to my doctor and I was like, can I go on hormones? And she was like, you absolutely cannot. You have autoimmune diseases and the risk of breast cancer is very high. Now, that has been disputed since that conversation, whatever it was, 8 years ago that I had with her, right? And there are a lot of people, again, we're seeing a huge spike in HRT and in bioidenticals because we are talking about menopause and because women can't sleep and they're having hot flashes and they feel uncomfortable. And if they are at low risk for any of these things, we're finding that is, you don't have to stay on hormones forever to get the benefits of them. And for me, I'm like, that's great. If that works for you, if you have insurance that can cover that, or you can afford it, that's one thing. But if you're not in a socioeconomic position to do that, you are still going to have menopause and menopausal symptoms. What do you do then? Yeah. It's one of the reasons all of our products are under $40. We do not want to be, again, what you were saying before, this kind of cisgendered white woman, middle age, middle to upper class problem. This is something that affects so many different people. Yeah. And certainly some people who never even expected menopause. Like if you have breast cancer or you're on chemo for some reason. I met a young woman who is 33 years old who is in remission from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and had such bad night sweats. Her mother had to change her sheets twice a night. And those are things that oncologists are not prepared to talk about. That is, medical menopause is not what they care about. They care about treating cancer. So where are the people to kind of pick up that conversation? That's just as important to me as, are you able to take, are you in middle age? Are you able to take hormones? If you can't, what are economic solutions for you? What are effective solutions for you? As much as, the non-binary conversation, gender non-binary, menopause is a huge issue because hormones are the issue. And nobody is talking to this community about that. And Heather Carina, it definitely just
her, I think. Are you talking
what cartel is this?
Well, yeah. I love her book because her book is like not written, because I feel like the whole menopause conversation assumes you're some sort of like very wealthy person who can just, go out and spend whatever. And hers is the first book I've read. That's like, a lot of people don't have any money. Like,
yes, that is exactly right. Yeah. That this is as much a socioeconomic issue as it is anything else. Yeah. And, again, this is one of the reasons that I felt so strongly about the company and about doing this is, look at our healthcare system. There are so much prejudice and so many biases that we don't even think about when it comes to healthcare. And so much of it is predicated on economic status. And we need to change that as well. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I sound so stuffy now.
Are you crying?
No, I wish I'm not crying.
That'll be later.
I'm so passionate about it. It's possible that I could cry at any moment.
Yeah. But I'll probably cry later. I cry like once a day too. It's just like, I think you crack open a little bit at this age. So
you know what, and that makes me happy because I thought it was just that it was from being a CEO. So I'm kind of happy to hear that, it's just menopause cracking a little.
No, you're doing new things. You're overwhelmed. And I think you're cracking open, not cracking up, right? And you don't have that shame from when you were young, when you would cry and you'd feel ashamed about it. You're like, I should be handling. I think you just cry and move on.
Exactly. Cry and move on.
Whereas don't fight the tears and then cry and then have this whole young drama thing.
Right, exactly. Like, don't cry, I don't want to be sad. Yeah. No, I completely and 1000% agree.
It will move.
I completely agree.
Anyway, I'm so glad to talk to you. I hope I want to talk to you again. I hope this conversation continues. Thank you for being there. I was so happy to see you joining. I'm so happy to watch.
Well, I was going to say the same thing about you. And, you know, our next conversation, I wanted to ask you about the great conversation that you had about menopause and being single and what it's like to date during menopause. You know, I have a very understanding partner, but I think that must be a very different experience in and of itself. And so for me, maybe we do a live on State Up and we can talk about that, because I think that's super important and I would love to discuss.
I think it's very relevant. You know, it could just be like not very many people make it to 51 without having been married or in a long-term relationship, you know, the relationship, which I seem to have. But I think it's relevant because I think there's women who are thinking about leaving their relationships and are frightened. And so I think no one's had more experience, I feel like, in the world. Maybe no one has as much experience as I have.
Well, then we need to talk about it more.
I've got things to say. You can get in trouble out there. You know, I want women to be okay.
I know. I hear you. All right. Well, that's something that we'll do and we can figure that out. But I can't thank you enough for having me on. And I really appreciate it because I think all the work that you're doing is formidable. And you are formidable.
Oh, you too, women. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's do this together.
Now I will cry. Now I am crying. Okay.
All right, sweetheart. I will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.